Gary 3, heading for the Caribbean and Martinique.
That'll be okay, but it's this end that's
Yeah, the drama.
yeah. But I think
The original shipping window was between the 1st and the 30th of November, and at that stage, with less understanding of the shipping industry than I have now, I imagined that date to be around mid-November. At the beginning of November, the loading window changed to the 15th to 30th of November, and my excitement mounted. Then, on the 8th of November, I got my first personal loading email from Peters and May saying they had chosen the good ship Ryderland to transport Golden Haze and others across the Atlantic. On the 15th of November, I got this email telling me that the probable loading date was now December the 1st. And on that basis, I booked a ferry from Calais to Dover on the 27th to go to Golden Haze in Cowes Yacht Haven and move her to a marina in Southampton. Prepare her for loading by taking off the sails, spray hood and bimini with its new solar panels. And the morning after my arrival in Cowes, I set sail. Well, started the motor and headed for Town Quay Marina in the centre of the Southampton docks area.
wasn't bad last night. Long trip down, felt really knackered by the time I don't know, got up in the morning, closed the apartment down, got in the car, driven to Calais, got on a P&O ferry, got off a P&O ferry, drove for 2.5 hours to Southampton, put the car in the multi-storey car park, walked with all my bags and stuff down to City Marina first, just to check that my berth's okay for today, which it is, and then City Marina, hung around for an hour while I got the red funnel. Being over 65 had its advantages. It was £12.50 instead of £18. So becoming a mature person has its advantages. Well, that might be the only advantage. Anyway, Town Quay Marina, Golden Haze. Do you copy over?
This is Town Quay Marina, go over.
Yeah, good morning to you. Oh, good afternoon. I'm just outside the entrance. May I come into the visitor's berth, please?
This is Town Quay, yeah, come away on the inboard side. There'll be port side too as you come round over.
Okay, I may try and see if I can turn around so I'm ready to leave in a day or two.
Town Quay, copy.
What's that? Thank you. Standing by to
Town Quay Marina is small but beautifully formed. It's actually a very nice place to wait for loading, as it's in the middle of Southampton docks, and it's also in the middle of the town with supermarkets, pubs and restaurants all close by. The marina staff made me feel very welcome, and it's very well equipped. The Wi-Fi is some of the best I've encountered in any marina, and the security via keypads everywhere is excellent. The facilities are spotlessly clean, warm, and perfectly adequate. I've chosen well. The next email, which arrived the day I got to Town Quay, showed an extended loading period to now the 3rd of December and a warning about Christmas and stevedores on the other side of the Atlantic. Golden Haze needed undressing for transporting, and I decided first to check the backstays bottle screws to make sure they were working okay. The starboard one was fine and unscrewed easily, but the port was frozen solid. I wrestled with it for over an hour, breaking 2 8mm spanners in the progress, and then gave up and called the experts, local riggers called Riggit, who promised to come over at 10 o'clock the next morning, which they did, armed with big spanners and a full toolkit. Having failed to undo it, they got out the angle grinder and cut the bottle screw off, cleaned the offending thread on the backstay, and then installed 2 new bottle screws. Being able to remove the backstay and the topping lift are essential to the loading process. I then removed the jenny, folded it up and got it in the sail bag, and took the spray hood off and the bimini. The next day the loading date changed again, and that happened on a daily basis from then on. The dates getting later, moving forward to the 6th of December, giving me a loading time of 0800 at dawn, and the news that I needed a hard hat, high-vis jacket and boots, none of which I had. I called my crew and nephew Sim, asking him to get a couple of hats and jackets, and informed him that he was probably going to have to drive down and sleep on board on the 5th, ready for the early start the next morning. The next email moved my loading date to the 8th, but a load time of 10:30, which meant that Sim could drive down in the morning. The next email changed the loading time to 13:30, which pleased both Sim and me very much indeed, and felt a lot more civilized. Bravely facing the challenge of the 1.5 mile motoring across the docks to the good ship Ryderland, we set off with an ETA of 13:15 for our 13:30 appointment, only to discover that the motorboat, which was meant to load before lunch, was still sitting alongside, and the yacht that was meant to load after Golden Haze was also there, a good hour and a half early. And so the waiting game started. The motorboat was moved further astern and the strops were lowered, and eventually she was lifted up and swung inboard to be lowered into her waiting cradle. What made the progress slow was that she had to be held in the strops until safely settled in the cradle, and then longer strops had to be put on the crane for Golden Haze. So we just motored a tick over into the ebbing tide, holding station near Ryderland. This process of loading the motorboat took well over an hour and a half, longer than the anticipated 1 hour. We were then signalled to come alongside, where the rope ladder hung down the hull of the ship. To my horror, I saw it was of the broomstick type, really narrow, round treads, and not at all the pilot-type ladder that I'd envisaged. Peterson May had warned that the boat crew must be capable of climbing a 40-foot ladder from the yacht to the ship's deck. I thought I probably could, but not a rope ladder with only tiny toe holds. The ship dropped lines to us alongside, and the new bottle screws earned their keep as Sim and I struggled to undo them with frozen hands, spanners and grips. Then a professional in the form of Colin, the Peters and May loadmaster, showed how broomstick ladders should be used and joined us on deck as we continued to wrestle with the backstays. It appeared that the divers who normally guide the lifting strops into place and position them either side of the keel were not available that day, which explained why the lifting of the motorboat had taken so long.
Nice and slowly and easy.
Normally, the Peters and May loading team comprises of 2 people, which would speed things up enormously. But the second member of the team was off ill and there was no replacement possible.
This is just standard normal keel with a bolt, is it? Michael? Is it a thin keel or tube bolt?
Michael. Yeah. Yes.
What sort of keel do you have?
I've got a fin keel. Oh, the strops. See the black tapes?
Yeah.
That's the mark for the aft strop.
Yeah.
And the black tape there is the mark for the...
Which is roughly where I was going to put it. Now, what it is how difficult it's going to be to get these belts under the keel with the tie.
Oh, no.
Right.
Well, no, the only thing you've got was my rudder, of course, which is a spade rudder.
Okay. Give your teeth, please. Like this. Hop down and slowly forward. Trying to do that action bar just now. The tide was screeching. It just turns the belts up. Makes it pull.
I mean, you've got the rudder... Well, obviously it's about there.
About there. I'm waiting for the divers, but they're recharging the tank, so I really would like to just get on with it. Please, Chief, continue bring the gear forward. Another fender we can put on this.
Michael?
Yep. Another fender.
There's some.
When the stop's on.
Once the starboard aft lifting strop was positioned, a line was tied to it to prevent it moving forward.
Redundant, I think the word you're looking for there, Captain. I didn't bring my orangutan arm today.
Colin then collected the port strop, tied it off at the bows, and then pulled the other aft back to the position on the stern.
That one where it is, can you skip to that? Back down.
I collected the starboard forward strop and fixed a line to it so that it could be moved forward to the bows. Clearly, the positioning of the strops would have been easier if the divers had been in the water and if there had been at least one other Peters and May loadmasters or assistants. However, Colin did a brilliant job, but it is very difficult for one man to be in two places at once, however hard he tries.
Taking it forward in a second. Is it? Yeah. When I spell them on for you have. I don't know what Chief, small hook down, please. And I. Good ex-military, all my mates are down with it.
The crane and controlling strops and lift was all done by the ship's mainly Asian crew of 6 or 7 men, led by a first officer, I think, who ran the deck.
There's the taglines you want, guys.
To my delight, Colin told us to remain on deck as the rope ladder was unclimbable, and we would be lifted into Golden Haze to the ship's lower deck level to disembark over the rails, which I did with the help of some of the crew, I'm afraid.
We're just going to come down a touch, right? And I'm going to take a bit out of the high side. Chief, just a small hook down, please, Chief.
Colin was the consummate professional,
Okay, Chief.
clearly enormously experienced and very, very conscientious. Taking good care of the boat was paramount despite being understaffed. Don't be fooled by this edit. From Colin coming on board to the start of the lift had to be the best part of an hour, and I don't think anyone could have set up lifting strops faster or better. I always felt Golden Haze was in very good hands. From here, we clambered onto the deck of the good ship Riderland, and the very, very delicate business of craning Golden Haze up and guiding her between the obstructions and masts began. Lowering her into the cradle presented a keel height problem, and the cradle had to be adjusted with the help of an angle grinder. Once she was secure in the cradle, Sim and I went back on board and replaced the backstays, closed down all the electrical systems, covered the wheel, and locked her up before climbing back down onto the ship's deck and getting a taxi to our cars to the multi-storey car park. Sim driving to London, and me to Ashford and the tunnel to Calais, then home. There are thousands of cargo ships trading around the world, and their intention is to unload cargoes at a port and ideally pick up another cargo to carry on to some other port where they will hopefully find another cargo to pick up and go, and so on. Now clearly, the ship owners are actively looking and booking cargoes, and companies like Peters and May are actively looking for a ship that can pick up yachts in Southampton and deposit them in Antigua, the Virgin Islands, and eventually Fort Lauderdale at some date during November. I get the impression that at the time the deal was done between Peters and May and the owners of Riderland, she was off the coast of South America heading for Rotterdam in the Netherlands. On the arrival in the North Sea, off Rotterdam, she was obliged to anchor until a berth in the docks became free, and after discharging her cargo, she then moved to another berth whilst repairs were done to her fuel pump, just a day or so. From Rotterdam, she went to Hull to pick up another cargo, but was again forced to anchor for a day or two, waiting for a berth in that port to become free. Having loaded, she headed across the North Sea to Denmark, where she discharged the cargo, unloaded another, and then headed south back down to the Netherlands, where she discharged her cargo and booked her berth in Southampton docks. From the Netherlands, she headed for the Solent, but slowed up off Brighton as another ship was occupying her berth in Southampton docks and was having problems. Riderland hove to until the ship cleared the berth, and then she headed up the Solent into berth 162, Southampton docks, arriving some hours later than anticipated. So that's why the dates kept changing for the loading of Golden Haze, and all this is perfectly normal. Running cargo ships is a complex operation and not like a number 10 bus running to a fixed timetable. With the exception of companies like Seven Star, who own their own semi-submersible yacht transport ships, as well as a large fleet of cargo ships, and therefore have greater control over yacht transport's operations, it's always going to be the way it was for me. Seven Star also quoted me for this voyage, but the price was higher than Peters and May. But Seven Stars didn't get enough interest in their voyage, so it was cancelled. Thank goodness I booked with Peters and May. I arrived back in France to find a couple of significant emails. First, the potential insurers for Golden Haze in the Caribbean, Offshore Risk Management, sent an email demanding the completion of yet another 5 documents on top of the 7 I'd already completed and sent them. They also wanted direct access to my bank account for payment, rather than my making a bank transfer to them. They also required that the surveyor I had used for the survey that they'd requested, Nigel Harris, return to Golden Haze and had to sign off that I had replaced for example, the new flexible French undated gas tube from the bottle to the bulkhead with an English dated tube and purchased a fire blanket and so on. Never had I been told by this company that following the survey, the surveyor would be required to return to the boat and confirm that all survey recommendations and comments had been carried out. My feeling about offshore risk management is that if they are this slow and pedantic when they're trying to take your money, then they would be living hell if you ever tried to make a claim with them. So I knocked it on the head. I was left with the alternatives of Pantanius for $1,000 third party only, or Edward William SL, fully comp, single-handed, night sailing, afloat 365 of the days of the year for around €1,000. I emailed Edward William SL to see if the rate had changed, and there was a very small adjustment, and they sent me an application form to sign and return. I had contact with several people within the organisation, all of whom were friendly, efficient and helpful, and responded to emails within 24 hours, like a breath of fresh air. The second email, which also failed to amuse me, was an invoice from Peters and May for nearly $600, as apparently the Antiguan authorities had changed the method of measuring boats that arrive on a cargo ship. The email made it clear that if I didn't pay this invoice, the boat wouldn't be unloaded in Antigua. I was surprised at this considerable charge, as the original amount must have been included in the quotation for transport and unloading of Golden Haze in Antigua. I made the dollar transfer, as clearly there was no other option, and I asked Peters and May to send me the original wharfage fee and to send me copies of the papers from the Antiguan authorities showing the new system, and when P&M knew about this system. Sadly, at the moment, Peters and May have my money and my boat, but I have no paperwork substantiating the invoice. Anyway, Ryderland and Golden Haze are on their way to the sun. 5 days before Christmas, I'm on an expensive jet plane flying transatlantic to meet Golden Haze in Antigua. And only 1 day behind schedule, Sim and I are on the deck of Rydelander, dressed in our hard hats and high-vis jackets, ready to climb aboard and prepare Golden Haze to be splashed into the Caribbean. Once aboard, again, we remove the backstays and uphaul and set out fenders on the starboard side. Peters and May had a full loadmaster team of 2, and Will came on board to secure the 2 lifting strops. Sim and I left the boat again and climbed down the ladder onto the deck of Rydelander. closely followed by Will, whilst Golden Haze was slowly craned across the deck. And with me and Sim safely on board again, she was lowered into the sea, where I went below to purge the air out of the Volvo shaft seal. Sim and I carefully reset the backstays for hopefully the final time. The strops were removed, and Will showed how a professional in boots can climb a Peters and May broomstick rope ladder. Sim reset the topping lift, whilst I went below to start up all the electronics and get the engine running. What is known in the trade technically as a good shut-off was performed by Sim, and on a blustery Caribbean morning, Golden Haze departed the tender care of Peters and May and Rhinelander.
Right. Oh, thank God. And all the old gods too. Congratulations, Skipper. Well,
unloading is a million times easier than loading.
So, 3 days before Christmas, in a glorious 25 degrees, we made the 2-hour rock hopping trip round to our first port of call, Jolly Harbour, which was pretty uneventful, except we were running on fumes when we got to the fuel berth.
No, next one.
With the tanks full of diesel, we went astern into our first Caribbean mooring in order to put on the sails, spray hood, bimini and solar panels and prepare ourselves for our 150-mile voyage south to Martinique, where an annual berth was reserved for Golden Haze. At my website, gentlesailing.com, you can find my books about sailing and boats. French Canal Routes to the Mediterranean has sold over 3,000 copies, and the Gentle Sailing Route to the Med, down the Atlantic coast without having to spend a night at sea, has sold over 2,700 copies. The Atlantic Crossing Guide, which I published last year, is being downloaded in amazing numbers, I'm really pleased to say. They're all instant PDF downloads, and there's a link to a UK website that can turn them into printed books for around £5 if that's what you prefer. Gentlesailing.com. About a dozen books there, including guides to the Caribbean and crossing the Pacific. Fair winds.